And now we're up to Amar Rava. Rava is going to offer an alternative answer to reconcile the stira, the contradiction in the Mishnah and the Brisa, and that's on Daf Chavches Amid Beis. Shema Meis lo chayshinan, Shema Yamus chayshinan. What does this mean? If you're talking about the past, and the shliach is on his way to deliver the get, then we're not going to assume that before he delivers the get, the Baal died. And he's already dead at the time that the shliach wants to deliver the get. That's called Sheva Meis. And we're going to apply the principle of Uki Gavra B'chezkas Chaim, and we're going to assume that he's still alive. However, everyone's going to die. And therefore, Shema Yamus, Chayshina, we always have to worry that in the future, he might die. So therefore, when he gives a get and he says, Sha'ach Askoda Misasi, then every moment we have to be choshesh that this is the hour before he will die. So we're looking at the future. And therefore, in the case where, as far as we know, he's alive, and she, as let's say, a Bas Yisrael, can continue to eat truma, to say that no, he died, and at this moment he's dead, that we're not going to say. That contradicts the Cheskes Chaim. But when the Brisa says she cannot eat truma, shach askoda misaso, that's called, we're choshesh that this is the hour before he will die, looking down at the future. We know that everybody will die. So that doesn't contradict the Cheskes Chaim. So Gemara asks the following kasha: Amalei Rav Ada bar Masel Rava for node. What about the case of the node, where according to those Tanoim, Rabbi Yehuda and his group, he's not allowed to drink from the node of yayin, and why? Because we're chayshinan shema yibaka node, which means that maybe at the time that he, right? Just 1 second. So that at the time that he drinks the wine, we have to be choshesh that in the future, the Shema Yamosu, and yet upligi, which means that although you reconcile yourself with the shita of Rabbi Meir, who holds the Shema Yibaka Nod Ein Chosheshim, just 1 second. Right, no, I'm sorry. Rabbi Meir is the one who works out well. Let's just get the cheshbon. According to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, you're not allowed to drink from the wine because l'shema yomos chayshinon. Right, we have to be choshesh that tomorrow, when he wants to be mafresh to truma masa, the node is already broken, the wine is spilled, and he's eaten tevel. But what are you going to do with Reb Meir's shita? Reb Meir says l'shema yibaka lo chayshinon. So that would mean the l'shema yomos lo chayshinon. And although it is possible to reconcile according to the shita of Rabbi Meir, but your assumption was that l'shema yomos chayshinon according to everybody. And that's why you interpreted our Mishnah, the Brisa, that you're not allowed to eat truma, she can't eat truma, in the case of Sha'ach Haskoda Misaso, because l'shema yomos chayshinon. But that's not true according to Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir says l'shema yibaka nod lo chayshinon, and that's a case of shema yomos. On Rabbi Yehuda mi diskarti or shani no the efshe de mosel l'shom. Guess what? He gives the node over to a shomer, and we can rely on the fact that the shomer will supervise and guarantee that this node is not going to be broken. And therefore, not choshesh for b'kiyas hanod. But if there's no shmira, if there was no one who's supervising, then we would say chayshina lemisa, chayshina le b'kiyas hanod, shema yomus in the future. And even Rabbi Meir would agree that she's not allowed to eat truma. The only reason she's allowed to eat truma, according to Rabbi Meir, is because we rely on the shomer. Maskif lo rav arva tzorah. When you have an arev, then the Orev who calms down the Malva by guaranteeing that in event that the Lova defaults, he will pay up the Chov, well, he himself needs an Orev. That's an idiomatic phrase. And therefore, you're going to tell me that the Shomer is Orev, meaning he's committed to make sure that the node doesn't break. Well, guess what? He himself needs an Orev. So it's impossible to rely on a Shomer. Elama Rava, but Rava offers a different answer. Shema meis lo chayshinan, Shema yomos tanoihi. Okay, you're right. That I can't work out according to all the Tanoim, because Rabbi Meir is not choshesh l'shema yomus, meaning Shema yibaka node in the future. But nevertheless, the brisa that says that a woman who receives a get that it's going to be chal shachas kodesh bisasa is not allowed to eat truma, that reflects the shita of Yehuda and the other Tanoim. So we no longer have an answer that can work out universally according to all Tanoim. Unanimously, I should say. Okay. The Mishnah says, if he sends a korban chatos medinas hayam, we're not choshesh shebayamos, but we can be makriv the korban b'chezkes shukayam. Frek the Gemara v'habe'inan smicha. There's no shlichus for smicha, and a bala korban has to come with his korban chatos, let's say, and he has to do smicha. How could a shliach do that on his behalf? Rav Yosef korban nashi. The case was that a woman violated b'shogeg a chiyuv kares, and she's chayeves chatos, and the halacha is that nashim enam somchos. So when she sends the chatos through a shliach, he can bring the chatos under a cheskes chayim, and the absence of smicha is not an issue. Rav Papa Amar gives an alternative answer. Let's say it's a korban of a man, but b'chatos ha'ov. And a chatos ha'ov does not require smicha, because smicha only applies to behemos, to korban behemo, but not to ophos. Now, the Mishnah had given three different scenarios in which we rely on a cheskes chayim: the shliach who brings the get from medinas hayam, an Eishes Kohen whose husband went to medinas hayam, and a person who sends his korban chatos from medinas hayam. Tzricha. We need all three of them. The iash me'inon, if we only had the Tana telling me the case of shliach lavi get, mishum de lo efshar. Okay, in the case of get, if you can be choshesh that he died, then the get is not valid, and she's going to be an aguna. But avol truma de efshar. So what happens if you want to be choshesh that maybe the Baal died in the medinas hayam, so she'll eat shchulin? Amalo, then we're not going to rely on a cheskes chayim. The iash mini betruma delo efshar. Let's say she's a very poor person, zimnin delo efshar, and she supports herself by eating truma. Truma is a lot cheaper on the market by law of supply and demand than chulin. Avol chatos ha'ov. Now here you have to take out the word oaf, unless the Gemara adds the word oaf according to Rav Papa. But according to Rav Yosef, for sure, you have to take the girsa of chatos without the word oaf. So a shliach is representing someone who sent the chatos and from medinas hayam, and he's bringing the chatos on the mizbeach. Is misfeka lo leil chul azor. So then you won't be able to bring the korban chatos because you have to assume that maybe perhaps he died. And if he died, then you're bringing chulin lazora because of the 5 chatos ha-mesos, amongst them is mesa baila, is therefore tzricha. The Mishnah has to tell me that even in this case, it's considered like lo efsha, and therefore we're not going to be choshesh shemayonos. This leads us to the Mishnah. Shlosha dvarim Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Prota lifnei chacham kimus dvar. 3 halachas that they accepted from Rabbi Elazar. 1, al ir shekifua karkom. So this is called a meitzar shetzoro agoyim al ir misaviv, and the city is sieged. V'al sfina mutrefes bayam, there's a boat that's capsized in the ocean, and it's about to fall to the bottom of the sea. Val Yotzi Lidon, and they took him out to put him to death. Shehein bechezkas kayom. Now, here it says halayotze lidon. We're not talking about a case where he's already been condemned to death and they're taking him out to kill him. So let's focus for a minute on the case of Yotze Lihore, which means that it's already after the Gemar Din. And in all these cases, we don't know if he died or he didn't die. So in the case of Hikifua Karkum, which means that the Matzar, which is the siege, is already up and running, but they haven't yet broken into the city. Or if they're taking him out to judge him, but he hasn't yet been condemned, or a boat that may or may not fall to the bottom of the sea, in all those cases, there's a cheskes chayim. But in the case where they already entered into the city and they've captured the city with the full intention of destroying the city, or a sphina that went down to the bottom of the sea, or someone who's now being taken out to the guillotine, so to speak, to be put to death. In all those cases, we don't know if he's still alive or dead, so we can't apply the principle of uki gabra b'cheskes chayim, but nosan aleim chumrei chayim v'chumrei mesim. We're going to have to be machmir and assume both l'chumra. Bas Yisrael a Kohen, if there's a Bas Yisrael married to a Kohen, so now we're going to assume that the Baal is dead, and therefore she can no longer eat Truma. However, Bas Kohen Yisrael, here we're going to assume that the Baal is still alive, and therefore she cannot eat Truma. So we're going to go l'chumra in both directions, considering in the case of Bas Yisrael a Kohen that her husband is already dead, and in the case of Bas Kohen Yisrael, to assume that her husband is still alive, and therefore lo tochal b'truma. The Gemara says, "Amar Rabbi Yosef lo shanu ela b'bezdin shel Yisrael." When do we say that we assume that he might still be alive, and that's even after Gemar Din? So we have to be machmir to assume. Just 1 second. I have to be machmir to assume that maybe he's still alive. And why is that? Because in a Bezdin Shel Yisrael, even after Gemar Din, we have halacha, as Rashi points out here. Let's take a look at the Rashi. Shaliachar Gemar Din, Rashi says, Zimnin dechazulei skusa umachzirno, so k'ramina b'Gemar Din, Hasus Ratu Mamida. So it means even after the Gemar Din, we still have halacha of matzulo schus upatru. And therefore we have to be choshesh that maybe he's still alive. Aval bebezdin shel akum, came in the Gemara leidina k'tala mikta k'tali le. Once they've already been gozer the din, it was nigmar din lemisa, they've immediately put him to death. They're bloodthirsty, they want to put him to death. And we don't have a chash that maybe somebody will find this chus and they'll rescind the psak din. Amalei Abaye says to Rabbi Yosef, I don't understand. Even in a case of a bezdin shel akum, is it really definite that he's going to be killed? All right, bezdin shel akum nami de mekabli shukta. All right, you're right that they're not going to be find him as chus and give him a retrial, but nevertheless, they may bribe the judges. Amalei, Rabbi Yosef responds to Abaye, ki shakli. When do we assume that the dayanim, the so-called judges in a non-Jewish court, will receive a shochad? That's only mekami delichtem purse shnamai. That's only before the chsimas gzaradin. But lebasa the michtam purse shnamai Lo shaki. They want to boast about the fact that they put someone to death. So they're not going to accept shochad. Meisvei, the Gemara Yasakash on Rav Yosef from the Mishnah. The Mishnah here is a Masechet Makis, and it's after Gemar Din La Riga. He was condemned to death, and then he ran away, and he comes back to the same Beis Din. And the question is, do they have to retry him? Or can there be somech on the fact that they already condemned him to death? And the Mishnah establishes, Kol mokum sheyamdu shnayim v'yomru me'idim anu es ish ploni shenigmar dino bebezdin shel ploni uploni ploni edo harei hare. So if two witnesses will testify that this person already was condemned to death in another bezdin, they mention the name of the bezdin, and they mention and identify the edim, then we put him to death based on this edus. And we're not going to be choshesh that maybe after the Gemar Din, they found the schus, and that's why he was potter. So we're not going to assume the possibility of Shema Yimtzalosh schus, because that's not shchia. Whereas we said before that nosim ol chumrei chaim chumrei mesim in the case of nigmar dino v'bezdin shel Yisrael. So the Gemara suggests dilma bareach shayim. In the case of someone who ran away from the bezdin after bezdin had condemned him to death, for sure they're not going to find any schus. But if he wasn't boreach, then even after the Gemara Din, it's possible, and we have to be worried about the possibility that maybe chazru matzu bo schus. Hoshma, the Gemara raises another objection to Rav Yosef from a brisa. Shoma bezdin shel Yisrael sheyu omrim ish ploni mes. Bezdin found a some sort of an edus that so and so died. Now he writes here in the name of the Rishonim, he says, Machma she'over avera shechayoven aleh malchus v'achar shel ku chazer v'yover shenis al avera zu achar shel ku chazer pam shlish also avera. And then the law is, if he repeats the same avera for malchus 3 times, they machnisin osol kippah, machil osol siorin ad shekreison ivkas umeis. So there was an assumption that he died. Or, for example, we had some sort of a call that ish ploni nerag, he was killed by a bezdin, or a capital crime, is yasirus ishta. We can marry off his wife. However, if we heard from Kumandat Risun, right, these are the goyim who actually the executors, I guess you'd say, shall ovdei mish ploni meis, then we're not going to believe them, even though the meisiach lefi tumo ish ploni nerag al yasirus ishto. The Gemara clarifies, what does it mean that the bezdin heard that so and so meis? Umay, and what does it mean that they heard that in a bezdin nerag he was put to death? Ilema meis mamish v'nerag nerag mamish is then the kavose gabi ovdei kochavim amai al yasirus ishto hakaimelon dechol meisich lefi tumo heimune mehem nile. So in the case of ovdei kochavim, who said that he was put to death or that he died, then it was meisich lefi tumo. So we should be able to rely on the testimony of Masechet Lefi Tumo, and this is based on a Gemara in Yevamos Daf Kuf Chav Aleph Amid Beis, and Hemuni Hemnele, we believe that testimony of Masechet Lefi Tumo of a guy. Elolav, shouldn't we therefore assume that Mace doesn't mean that we heard that he died, but rather Yotzei Lamus, that it was after the Gzardin Lemisa, he was condemned to death. And when we heard Nerag, it doesn't mean Nerag Mamish, but rather Yotzei Liharag. That they're taking him out to die. Ukitani, the Brisa says that Bezdin Yisrael, we assume that for sure they put him to death. Once they took him out to die, he was Ishto, and therefore we could marry off his wife. So this is a proof against Rav Yosef, because Rav Yosef says that Yotzei Leharig B'Bezin Shel Yisrael, we have to put upon him Chumrei Chaim because maybe they found the schutz. And where it says Li'olam, we're talking about Meis Mamish. That the testimony that we accepted was that he died after they were machtas in Bekupa. Neragor, he was actually put to death, Mamish. But now you're going to ask, what about an akum? Why don't we believe the akum meisiach lefitumo? The comment the kavase gabe akum. Amai lo. Why can't we marry off his wife? Well, kaimelon kol meisiach lefituma hemnui mehemne and immediately b'milsa lo shchicha ba. Milsa shaycha lo shaycha ba. Aval b'milsa shaycha ba is then avdilach zuke shekraya. So in other words, when did the Chacham rely on the testimony of a god to be mater an isha, an Eishes ish to marry? That's only in a case of milslo shaychaba, when the goyim doesn't have some sort of a vested interest in lying. But if it's a milsa shaychaba, like for example, to testify that this person was put to death by a bezdin, that's where the goyim take pride in the fact that we put to death the criminals, is then the Napoli. Avdi lachzuki shekrayim. They will lie in order to boast of their record that they put an accused criminal to death. Ikad Amri, another possibility is Omer Rav Yosef lo shanu el bebezin shel ovdei kochavim. That when does Rav Yosef say in the Mishnah that in a case of a Yotzei Liharig Alidei Bezdin, we impose upon him Chumrei Chaim Chumrei Meisim, that's only in a Bezdin Shal Akum, because even though there was a Gemar Din Lemisa, Asuyim Heim Lakacha Shochad Kidei L'Shacharo, and therefore we have to be imposed upon him Chumrei Chaim, because maybe the Goyim took a Shochad, and we think that maybe he wasn't put to death. Avol, but here on top of Chof Tes, the Bezin Shal Yisrael, they don't take Shochad, came in the Nofikle Dino Liktola, Hatlile. We can certainly assume that after the Gemara Din Lemisa, he was put to death. Maybe even after they condemned him to death, maybe somebody will come forward with his chus. And the Gemara says, Ki chazulei schusa mikami delig mardina. When is it generally asui or shchiach to find the schus? That's before the Gemara Din. But b'asur the Gemara Din sulo chazulei schusa. It's not shachiach that they'll find the schus, and therefore we don't have to be worried about that possibility, and we could assume that he is dead. Okay, then. So this is where we'll stop for today. And I wish you a great day. So thank you so much.